And welcome to Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres, episode 250. Yes, episode 250. I ought to really be celebrating much more with this episode, but I completely forgot about it until late last week, and well, it was kind of too late to really do anything about it. Anyway, this week, instead of being some big celebration of 250 episodes, which it really ought to be, it's going to be a feedback session. We've had 3 people send in images for feedback, and so we're going to be working our way through them, giving you lots of ideas, things to learn about, think about, and that you can apply to your own photography or editing. So stick around and we'll make a start. So yes, welcome to Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres, episode 250. I really wish I had thought of something for the 250th episode, but hey, it's not that long since we did the 5-year episode, so that'll kind of have to do, I think. So here we are, live on YouTube. If you happen to be watching live, then leave a comment. Let me know where you are. Let me know who you are. Let me know what the weather's doing, where you are. And if this is your first time, then just join in with the others. They're a friendly bunch and won't bite. I can see we've got a few regulars in already, so let's see who's here and what they're saying. So Susan says, hi from a warm and humid day in Kakubri. We're really not used to this. This is true, it's Kakubri. Kakubri is just 9 miles down the road from here. It is kind of quite warm, muggy today. In fact, there could possibly be even lightning storms a bit later. In which case, if they're coming in from the sort of west or southwest, then they'll hit Susan momentarily before they hit us here. So Susan, if the thunder and lightning start, let me know. What else have we got? We got John. John says, good day from Ohio. Nice weather this week, but a bit of rain as usual. Nadia says, hi from a damp but humid Fife. That's a bit further north in Scotland. Oh, John says, congrats on 250. Thank you. Alviji says, congrats. Happy 250th podcast from Chennai in India. Meg joins us and says, hi, afternoon, everyone. Marilyn says, greetings. Sorry, not Marilyn, April. April says, greeting all from a rainy Long Island, New York. Janet says, hi from Mississauga in Canada, where it has cooled down a bit, only going up to 28 degrees C. And Susan says, I'll keep you informed about the weather. Excellent. Right, well. So we have people, we have a podcast. Yeah, of course, don't forget to click like on the video as well if you get the chance. Helps the algorithms. I'm never entirely sure when the best time to hit like is, presumably after you've liked it, but of course if you are going to be around here, then if you click like fairly early on, it might even show it to some people while we're going out live, as opposed to just showing it to them afterwards. So give it a go anyway. Oh, Marilyn joins us, says hello from a hot Colorado. Right, okay, so before we make a full-on start, let's take a quick check up on the Smug Points. So basically, the Smug Points are coming from, are sitting at, for July, accumulated so far, Nadia, Janet and Susan are all sitting on 35 Smug Points. And that's because they submitted to the full feedback session 2 weeks ago. Everyone else is on 0, 5 or 10, depending on whether they've left a comment here. You see, if you leave a comment here, let me know you're watching, then you get 5 bonus Smug Points. So anybody who's turned up but not left anything has 0, or it hasn't turned up at all has 0. Anybody who came along to one of the last 2 in the month has got 5. Anybody who's left a comment on both of them have got 10. So if you leave another one today and you've been for the last 2, you'll be up to 15. Plus the 3 people who've sent in images will get bonus 25 Smug Points for submitting an image for feedback. It's always a good one. A good way of accelerating your Smug Points is to submit an image for feedback. There are very few places on the internet where you can get genuine feedback on your photography. This is one of them, and it's practically one of the only free ones as well, and is not too crowded. Because despite going for 5 years, we still don't have 30,000 weekly viewers or anything like that. So this is your chance to actually get your image in for genuine feedback from a professional photographer. There you go. Right, okay. So, where are we at? We have a podcast, we have viewers, we have people from around the world, we have weather forecasts. So, I think we can make a start. Now, the first image I'm going to start with is Eamonn. Now, I do remember Eamonn used to be around a bit more, then kind of wasn't for a while. Then he came back and just this week posted an image in the Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres Facebook group. and but with no explanation. But he posted it in the bit that was asking specifically for images for feedback. Not that one. Let's try that one instead. Yes, so this was the image. So he sent a robin on a stick. There's a phrase which will approve, which Andy will like if he happens to tune in later. So here we have a robin. Now, I did ask him what kind of feedback he would like and whether he could send me the original unedited version. He said he would send me the unedited version, but hasn't given me any feedback. So it's a kind of tricky one. I kind of toyed with the idea of not putting it in, but anyway, maybe he's got caught up. Give him the benefit of the doubt that he's suddenly had crises happening. So if he gets the chance to come back to this, then let's take a little look at this picture of the robin. Now, first of all, you know, not always easy to catch a robin, whether on a twig or a stick or so. They don't tend to sit around for long. So the fact that you get unless you are a professional wildlife photographer where you do this all the time and you've learned all the tips and techniques of how to do that, and you have endless patience to sit very still waiting for the bird to land just where you're expecting them to, then it's extraordinarily difficult to get a bird. However, this one, quite a nice little starting point of a robin. Now, he hasn't asked me what kind of feedback to give, so I'm just going to kind of be a little bit general with this. And what we'll do is let's just open this in Photoshop. Oh, April says cute little robin, and yeah, robins generally are, I think. So because it was just taken off a low resolution image off Facebook, I don't have a great deal to play with. But what we can do is, first of all, I think the couple of things that strike me is partly what we're looking at is how well does the robin stand out against the background. We can see it's a robin, we know it's a robin, but actually there's slight camouflage, almost there's quite a busy background, and there's quite a large paler bit up the top here, which sort of grabs our attention a bit. And the other bit with this, I think, that strikes me is the crop. So partly what we're thinking about is the crop, and partly what we're thinking about is how to make that robin stand out a little bit more in the picture. Now, the reason I say the crop is because, generally speaking, there's sort of 3-4 kinds of crops which fit better into certain places, which are more easily accessible, where this one is a kind of it's not quite square, but it's not quite, I mean, it's portrait, but it's not really portrait. So just to kind of show you briefly here that I think, generally speaking, I think you're better off either go for square, or go for portrait, or go for landscape, or go for panoramic or cinematic. It tends to be a way of going about it. It makes sense when I think about robins. I also think about Christmas. Yeah. Well, that's rather true. Robins are going to become somewhat synonymous with Christmas here in the Northern Hemisphere, or certainly here in Britain anyway. Robin in the snow is a very typical Christmas. And I think it's something to do with the red breast, or the idea of that bit of splash of colour in the middle of winter. Okay, so back to this idea. See, what you might do, if you were to make it portrait, then what you're really trying to do is make a point of the fact that you've got this sort of length of... But having said that, when I look at this, I don't think this necessarily works itself well to a portrait anyway. So what else might we do? I mean, actually, to be honest, it might work well kind of landscape. We kind of put it something like this, a little bit of kind of slight rule of thirds with the twig. Hit enter. Now, obviously, we've not got the right kind of background, so I will just do a quick... let's try the remove tool, and I just kind of paint over that bit, and it will plonk some kind of matching background into the back if we're lucky. Does seem to, yeah, there we go. So that gives us a sort of slightly, and to be honest, I think if you're going for that robin in the trees, because the robin is we're looking side onto it and it's looking into the picture, it's kind of nice to have a little bit more picture in front of it as such. I think it gives it a slightly better context. But the other way of going about this is quite simply, if we go back to our original thing, is to go square. Square, good old kind of Instagram size. So where do we go? Let's make that's 208 year, give or take. That's basically about it. And then maybe bring it in a little bit, bring it up a little bit. Again, perhaps have that twig just kind of on the thirds layer and the eye roughly on the thirds layer as well. And you kind of have something like that. So there's your square version of it. Now, next thing we want to do is try and draw a little bit more attention to it. Like I say, it is fairly busy. There's this bright patch at the top. And I think with the bright patch at the top, basically, if we took something like a curves layer, and then what we were to do is darken it down a little bit. But we don't want the whole thing dark because that's just made it too dark. What we really wanted to do is darken down the background. So what I will do is I will then turn that to black over here, and essentially I've masked. I'm going to use the mask, invert what I'm playing with here. So something like that, just kind of bring out the robin a little bit more. If I take that down to 50%, then I can just lightly touch up a couple of other options. So what that does, you can see, is by darkening down the outer bit, especially that top bit there, in fact I could even darken that a fraction more, something like that, then it draws our attention much more to the robin in the middle of it. But because there's kind of a mix of shades here, it's not so obvious that we've kind of completely vignetted it. Again, I could drop that down to 27 and just bring out a little bit more. But mostly it's that top part there I'm wanting to darken. Now, if I select all those and put them together onto another layer, another thing we could do, we're trying to make this stand out a little bit more, is go to Filter, Camera Raw Filter, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to just add a little bit more texture. Now, we don't have a lot in it because it's a very low resolution picture. It does look like probably the wing has got a little bit more texture. It might have focused just here rather than on the face. Difficult to tell. However, at this level, if I go to Effects and I add a little bit of texture, maybe a little bit of clarity, something like that, then now this is the problem is with it doing it right across the picture is it's also made the background sharper as well. So again, I'm going to invert the mask here. So I hold down my Alt key, and then now I'm going to invert my paintbrush to white, and I'm going to paint in the layer we've just created onto, sorry, put that back up to 100%. And now you can see what we do is this just makes the robin stand out a little bit more against the background. Do you see that? So just by using these two fairly basic techniques, quick masking, so curves layer, darken around, so, and then add a little bit more texture, clarity, just to the robin though, not to everything else. And now, if we group those together, you can see we've gone from that to that. Okay, let's just fill that a little bit more so you can see it more clearly. And what it does now is it brings this out. The only other thing I would say, let's select all that and place it onto a new layer again. The only other option here I would say is to always just check your auto. If you've got, you go to Image in Photoshop, Image Adjustment, adjustment, no, Auto Tone, Auto Contrast, Auto Color, Auto Tone, and Image Auto Color. Now you see that's interesting. You see the colour here is giving it a purple shift. Now it's maybe slightly too, but now the thing is with it is I think it's maybe gone too far. We've lost some of the warmth of it, but it does seem to make the robin stand out a little bit better against the background. So I'd be tempted to, we can now just take the opacity of that, go back to here and just nudge it up a little bit until we try and still kind of get a bit of the warmth of the robin, but we don't lose the whole warmth of the picture. And again, if we drop that down into the group, then we've gone from that to that. And overall now, I think your robin stands out better against the background. It fills the square crop quite nicely. This will work nicely on Instagram or, various other bits of social media as well, even Facebook, depending on where you're wanting to put it. So overall, I think this tends to do it. So that's pretty much how I would approach it, Eamonn. It's this idea that when you've got your picture, your bird against the background, what you're trying to do is make that bird stand out against the background. And tools you have in your editing toolbox include things like darkening the background to make the subject stand out a little bit more, adding a bit, you've already got the blur, you've already got a certain degree of, you know, the aperture you're using slightly wider so that the background is out of focus and the bird is in focus, but you accentuate that a little bit more by maybe adding a little bit more textural sharpness or clarity to, just the bird, allow the background to be soft as well. So, and then the last thing you do is whether there's any kind of slight color shifts which are going to again allow the bird to sort of stand out a little bit more against the richness of the background. And when we kind of add all these together, it makes that little bit of difference. And the other thing to think about is your crop. I think generally speaking, certainly if you're putting this onto social media, or even if you're printing it, because to be honest, that sort of not quite square doesn't really fit anything. It's not fitting your 8x10 frame, it's not fitting your 4x6 or your 5x7, or the sort of fairly standard portrait or landscape sizes. So kind of have a think about that as well. But hope that gives you some ideas, but thanks for sending the image in. Right, okay. A couple of comments. What have we got? April says, I think of red cardinals, Meg. Okay, red cardinals are a bird. I don't think we get them in Britain, or if we do, we certainly don't get them in our garden here in Scotland. But I guess that probably where you are, if red cardinals are more common than robin, so the chances are they probably are used in Christmas cards. John says, interesting, your Brit robins are quite different from our American robins. Oh, I don't really know what they're American. I just thought a robin was a robin. Okay, well, I'll have to look up to see what difference the American robins are like then. April says, and American robins remind me more of spring. Right, gosh, okay. So, yes, cultural difference, but of course, wildlife difference as well, different on the different continents. Okay. So next up then, we're going to go to John Harvey, and John sent through this picture and says this was taken in New Harbour in Maine in USA back in 2022. It is a favourite location of mine. I will be heading back there in September and will visit a lot of smaller locations in Maine and Rhode Island as well as Nova Scotia. So that whole kind of upper eastern seaboard of the US. Overall, I'm fairly pleased with the shot, but you are good at making improvements, so I'd appreciate your input if you have the time. I tried very hard to find the original without success. This shot was taken late in the day near sunset. Okay, right, well, thanks for sending this one in, John. Now, what are we up against here? So, yeah, I mean, I think broadly is, you know, you've captured something, that notion of a harbour at sunset, that kind of New England, where we've got with the sort of style of the houses and the jetty and the boats. I mean, in fact, not just New England. Could be UK as well. The houses are slightly different in places, but you know, it's certainly that's that same kind of autumn trees and everything else. So yeah, that fishing town, fishing village, harbour scene at sunset, always a good time to get it, because now it's a tricky one I did ask John to send me the original. John said, as he said, he just hunted all over the place, couldn't find the actual original. He did send me a couple of other photos taken from around the same time. Here we've got that same kind of idea. Again, now this is one where I know we're not in Britain. That's a very typically Canadian or Northeast American, New England kind of wooden house with the red paint. And yeah, these nice kind of harbour shots. But we'll come back to this one. Now, it's a tricky one, like I say, because it would be kind of good to see where what the original looked like, because I can see that there is some editing done here. Generally speaking, when you take the photo, most cameras, I would expect, given the lightness of the sky, that everything else would have been a bit darker. So you've obviously brought up some of the detail out of the shadows already. However, one of the problems that it has had a slight effect of, and we do this, because obviously we need to kind of even out, we bring up the detail out of the shadows, we tone down what the sky is doing, but it has made it look a little bit flatter than, because actually by trying to remove the darks and the lights, we've kind of lost a little bit of the contrast, and sometimes even just a little bit of extra contrast will boost it a bit. We also feel like I've lost a little bit of colour, which again might work with a little bit of contrast. So if I just open this with Photoshop for a moment, and if I just purely grab the levels and contrast, brightness and contrast, and move the contrast, now it then gets a little bit bright, take the brightness down a little bit, richens up the colours, and there you see, I think something like that just actually stops it for, you know, you can see that it's sort of added a certain level of depth to it before we start doing anything else. But what else have we got with this? Now, again, it's a landscape picture, but again, I don't feel it's as landscape as it could be, and it's certainly not square. So there is a notion of the crop, and I think for something like this, I wouldn't go square, but there's a lot of sky, and a lot of sky that isn't necessarily needed. And I would say if I go to the crop here, and when I grab the crop tool, it gives us these kind of lines here. And what we see here is that if you were taking roughly rule of lines of thirds, that the sky is taking up a third and a bit, and it doesn't need to take up as much as that. If you bring that down just so that this third level is running on the trees, so the sky isn't taking up any more of a third than a third, I think that if I just pull that up, automatically just gives us a slightly better composition with it. I mean, another option you can do with this as well, actually, if I go to that, is where instead of taking the third line to the edge of the sky, we take the third line to the edge of the water, so that now the water is taking up 2/3 here, and then the sky is just a little bit poking above the thing. So that, and then if we do something like that, that's now got slightly more, it's sort of slightly wider than a normal landscape, not quite cinematic, but moving in that direction. So you can do something like that. So there's these little bits of kind of how you play around with the crop. There's other areas that you could take this in as well. Our eye gets, or more than anywhere, the first place that our eye gets drawn to is this boat here, because it's sitting relatively central, but it's also surrounded, it's a dark patch surrounded by the light reflection in the water. Now, this then is sitting slightly off center. Again, if you wanted to do a kind of rule of thirds, you could do something like where you grab this up and then we take this spot here. Now, that's okay, except for the fact that actually I quite like some of the stuff going on over here. It does feel like we've lost a bit of context. Another option we could do, let's pull this over, is to sort of bring it in from this side a little bit and actually stick it more kind of there. What would that do? Yeah, that's kind of interesting, but again, maybe just a little bit difficult to say, because actually there is this bit here which is creating a line towards it, so maybe there's not a lot to do it, but it is always sort of worth playing around, just maybe a little touch here and there. Maybe we don't take the whole lot, maybe we kind of put it a little bit slightly more central, something like that. And actually, I quite like that. We've got the line, it now feels like the back of the boat is sort of lining up with the bottom left corner. We've got this diagonal running us through. The other thing, actually, I'm not totally sure whether this is exactly straight as well. If I kind of look in at the build, grab a line there, it's not quite, I kind of get the feeling we just need to tilt it just a fraction. Something like that maybe. And that kind of feels like it sits fractionally better. But anyway, we're always worth playing around with that. In fact, I'm going to tell you what, I'm going to go into a little bit more detail with that, with Marilyn's picture after this anyway. But I think really, without knowing what the original photo was like, I don't know how much I've got to crop to play with as is. A couple of comments here. What have we got? Oh, Janet's asking where in Nova Scotia is John planning on heading, because she's currently working through her photos from Nova Scotia back on her May-June trip. April reckons Maine is very pretty. VG says, I've heard Maine is a beautiful place. Meg says she really likes the reflections of the boats in the water. And VG says the shadows of the boats are quite clear. John says this was taken in New Harbour in Maine near Pemaquid Lighthouse. Pemaquid. I'm probably murdering the pronunciation of that. Haven't got a clue. Right, okay, so I suppose generally speaking, yeah, it's not a bad picture. All we've done really is play with the crop, but there is this notion, like I say, of the brightness and contrast, which is like we have to be slightly aware of the fact that when we bring too much out of the shadows and we push everything into the middle, and we're trying to do that because we don't want to lose the detail. And certainly sometimes I think it's one of these, it seems to be a topic we come back to again and again. Sometimes with a sort of it's like camera club mentality, there can be this such an intense focus on the idea of technical details that somehow it's a sin if you have lost anything in the shadows, and it's a sin if you have somehow lost anything in the highlights. And so we end up with this temptation to just have nothing in the shadows and nothing in the highlights, and everything just becomes bunched up in the middle. I mean, if I do a little levels thing here on this, what we can see is that, okay, there's a dip here, but it's very much most of the, there's very little over in the darks and there's very little over in the lights. If I stick that contrast back on, we now get a little bit more into the shadows. We don't want to go too high with the highlights and stuff like that, because actually what's making this is the beautiful colours that happen to be sitting in the reflections of the water. But what you could do, again, you can kind of, even if you brought it up a little bit, and then maybe, again, darkened down. So I need to change that. Darken down the little bits of water. Yeah, you know what, actually, there's something quite nice about that as well. Maybe just take a little bit of highlights in the sky. Just nudging that along. But if we do that, then what we're doing is we're, again, cutting further into the highlights. Yeah, I think there's something a little bit more about that. So that's kind of where I would think with that. But by and large, what are you thinking of? I suppose you talk about the fact that you're going on these trips a little bit more, what to be thinking about when you are. And certainly time of day, reflections, if you're talking about harbours, if you're talking about boats, that notion that the water is going to reflect what the sky is doing. So when you can get that kind of golden hour, beautiful colours in the sky bouncing off the water, that's always a good thing. One of the things that works quite well, which you've got here as well, is the fact that the sun kind of starting to look at backlight, that the sun is the other side of the subject. And so you'll get particular kind of reflections. I mean, well, where were we? If we go back to your original here, this is where the sun's the other side of it. This is where the sun is behind you as such, and it's reflecting straight onto it. There's a very different kind of feel to it. Here, well, we don't have any sun. It's sort of lost into the shadows of it. Here, the sun's quite bright. It's lighting up it's not, where is the direction of the sun? We've got shadows coming here. Okay, so the light is more or less sort of slightly behind you and to the side. And so it's lighting things up. We're getting some nice little shadows over here. So it's a bit of side light, really, which is working quite nicely. So side light, backlight, these are the kind of things that you want to be working with. When we look at something like this, actually, I think our attention gets drawn away from the boats quite often and up towards the house and the trees, where the sun is taking a lot more of a... whereas this one, certainly our edited version, I think... Yeah, so look into ways, always keep in mind that notion of side light, but also backlight. And I think if you can take that idea of backlight and water is a really good thing. Obviously, exposure is always one of these things that you've got to kind of be careful of. I would say, as a default, if you're unsure about your exposure, better to expose for the bright you can, generally speaking, bring a bit more detail out of the shadows than you can trying to bring details out of blown highlights. Certainly in Photoshop and Camera Raw. I'm not sure what program it is you use, John. But a lot of these, the more sophisticated editing programs, your raw files, generally speaking, you can bring a little bit more detail out of the shadow, but then you're not wanting to bring masses of details out of the shadow because you still want to have some of that contrast. So, but if the sky gets blown, it gets much harder to darken it without it looking false. So kind of expose for the sky, expose for the water, or maybe say expose for the water, the reflections. And then I think that probably gives you maximum flexibility. So I hope you found that useful, John. And thank you for sending the image in. What have we got here? John says, thanks, Kim. Your vision is always helpful. I'm pleased about that. And he says to Janet, he's heading to Lunenburg and Peggy's Cove will be 4th trip to Nova Scotia. Peggy's Cove, that sounds familiar. Did I ever go there? I think I did. I spent a year in Nova Scotia myself on a student exchange many years ago and absolutely loved it. Susan's been to Peggy's Cove. Wow, fabulous place, but my word, is blowing a gale. Did get a couple of good shots of the lighthouse, though. And Janet's also talking about having a day in Lunenburg and Peggy's Cove, but she's not got around to editing those photos yet. Oh, John says he mainly uses Lightroom. Okay, well, Lightroom should allow you to do most of what we were talking about there. Certainly, I mean, all I'm doing is playing around with brightness and contrast. Maybe a little bit on the colouring and then the crop. Nothing sophisticated. Right, okay. So, a little kind of quick reminder that if you find these podcasts useful, interesting, entertaining, and you would like to support them, then buymeacoffee.com/Kim Ayres. /Kim Ayres. Is one of the ways you can do it. Of course, don't forget to invite your friends. Click like on the video, subscribe if you haven't done already, hit the notifications if you haven't done already. But yes, do invite other people as well. Yes, so where are we at now? Okay, so yeah, let's move on. And what we can do is we're now going to move on to Marilyn. Now, yes, so there's Marilyn's picture, but there's a slightly bigger question coming from Marilyn, which I thought would be fun to investigate a little bit more. And Marilyn says, hi Kim, can you talk about converging verticals and the best way to avoid them or fix them if it's unavoidable? I took the attached photo, so let me just find Marilyn's attached photo. Not that one. That one. With my zoom lens set to 18mm and everything is tilted. Okay, so 18mm is wide angle. And when we go wide angle, generally speaking, that tends to distort things on the edges anyway. So what we've got is we've got this picture of a plaza, Hotel de Ville, but what we can also see is that it's tilting inwards on the left, tilting inwards on the right. And this is a very recognisable effect of using a wide angle lens. But converging verticals also tend to happen, even if your lens isn't particularly wide angle, but you happen to be standing a bit low and looking up. Things will tend to have a slight perspective vision in it anyway. So, let me run you through a couple of ideas here that I want to talk about with the idea of converging verticals. Now, sometimes converging verticals is exactly what you want. So if I click onto something like this, part of the idea of this photo is that we are looking up, okay? And we want to have that sense of looking up. So we've got all the, we've got the stairwell, we've got this 1891 there, we've got the sort of stairs going up to the doors, we've got the sky, we've got this clock tower at the top, we've got these windows up the top. So this is very much about we're standing in a courtyard looking up at the building. Okay. But sometimes we don't want that. Sometimes we want the straight on. Now, so what we can do is we can play around now. Okay, which way should I go around this? Should I talk about why it happens, or should I talk about how to fix it? Let's talk about, I'll tell you what, let's talk about the why it happens a little bit more first. So, let's show you an example. Just earlier today, just to try and grab, this is completely unedited photos, but just to show you what I'm talking about. I was out for my walk. There's a Tesco superstore in Castle Douglas. I was walking past it, and it has this at the entrance, this sign here saying when it's open, what you can buy in it, and it sits there. Now, this photo taken with my phone. Now, I took 3 photos of this. With this one, I stood back across the road and I used the zoom. And what we find is that there's not a lot in the way of converging verticals. So how can we tell? If I open this in Photoshop, and what I do is I grab a guide and I stick it level with the bottom, and I grab another guide over here and I stick it level with the bottom there, then what we find is with the guidelines, let's just drag that right to the edge of the corner, that if we've got them touching at the bottom, and when we come up to the top, we find there's a gap where the guidelines are at the top. So it is tilted back slightly. And the reason it's tilted back slightly is because I'm leaning, well, no, I'm not leaning backwards. This is much taller than me, okay? In terms of height, my head would come up to roughly around about where these bits of writing are. So it's taller than me, and so therefore I'm looking up a bit. Now, what happens then is I moved closer, and rather than being on zoom, I put it on 2x zoom. I put it on normal. I put it on the 1:1 ratio on my phone. And so filling roughly about the same amount of space in the frame, it went from that to that. And now, because I'm closer to it, those verticals are converging a bit more. It's looking more tilted, even though I'm shooting from exactly the same height. And then what I did was I put it on the wide angle and I moved forward again. And now we can see that we've really got quite a thing with the convergence. So if we take this and I now drag the line over here and the guideline over here, what we can see is that the gap at the top is much more. And of course, if it went on for long enough, it would eventually disappear. So if we lay on the ground underneath it looking up, it would converge a huge amount. Oh, I've got a Prasad. How can I submit photos? Email. Welcome, Prasad. It's too late to submit one specifically to this particular podcast because I tend to need them in advance. But if you want to submit to future ones, then you can, I'll tell you what, let's just do, for the sake of Prasad, we'll do a quick break and shift over to here. So there's 3 different ways you can submit. If you're on Facebook, we have a Facebook group, facebook.com/groups/UPwKA, UPwKA, Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres. If you are on Flickr, we have a Flickr group, flickr.com/groups/UPwKA. Or you can email me, kim@kimayres.co.uk. If you want to send me your image, tell me a little bit about it, tell me what your sticking point is, what kind of feedback you're looking for. I will do my best to help. You can do that today, you can do that this coming week, and it will be another couple of weeks before I have a specific feedback session, but I can include your picture then. So hope that helps. Right, okay, so back to our Tesco picture here. And what we can see then is that not only as I get closer to it, it veers back, but also as I use a wide angle lens, everything starts becoming distorted as well. We can see it's not just the Tesco sign here, but we can see that the light and the telegraph pole and these buildings, no, didn't mean to do that, whatever it was I did. These buildings over here, they're all leaning rather dramatically to the left on that side. And over here, Tesco's in the background is leaning dramatically to the right. Okay, so the wide angle lens is distorting the edges, even though the background buildings are further away. And then it's becoming increasingly distorted because I'm closer to it. Okay, so that's, so I just want to make sure that, okay, little bit, it says my picture's vanished off the picture there. That's okay, I'm assuming you're still seeing me and hearing me. Right, so where was I? There was always the problem with technicals in life. Oh, Prasad says, cool, thanks a lot, sorry to interrupt. No problem at all. Right, okay, so where was it? Yes. So in essence, part of the problem we've got is, okay, let's flick back here a sec. Let's clear that bit out. Very briefly, if you has a, let's take a little figure, we'll take our little Batman figure, and say we've got something that's taller than it, right? Now, the further away we are from it, if you think of the angle from the top of our little figure to the top of the pen, there is an angle. Oh, sorry, if I get those on a level, there is an angle. As I move it closer, the angle between the top of our figure and the top of the pen becomes sharper and sharper and sharper until it becomes a very, very steep angle. Okay? So the closer we get to something, the steeper the angle is. So if we stand further back and use a zoom lens, the angle isn't as steep. So the difference between the top and the bottom isn't as much by compared to us. The closer we get to it, the bigger that angle becomes. And so the more dramatic the converging verticals happen. So the more we look up at something, the more it seems to tilt. So something that feels parallel as we move back. So you can see here actually, even with my arms on this, so my elbows and my hands are parallel. As I tilt back further away from the camera, they're still parallel, but they don't look parallel anymore. Okay, my elbows look like they're far wider apart than my hands. Okay, but they're not. It's purely the angle we're at. So as we're looking up at a building, you can see that it seems to get closer at the top. So part of it is being closer or further away, and part of it is the use of a wide angle lens. And a wide angle lens then creates this distorted bit on the outsides. It's deliberately, a wide angle lens is deliberately trying to fit more into it, and it tends to distort the edges. Sometimes we play with that to good effect, but if you're not wanting to play with that, it becomes difficult. Okay, so we can see here, so what could we do about this? Well, one of the things we can do is we can try and straighten it. And for that, now there's a couple of different ways we can do this. Now, if we take something like this, there's not a lot of gap to go here, but what we can do, I'm going to duplicate that layer, and if I go to filter lens correction and I go to custom, down here on transform we've got vertical perspective, horizontal perspective. Now horizontal perspective shifts it, sort of moves it left and right. Now it's not an accurate left and right. What it's doing is it's sort of stretching one side and calming down the other. Now if we do the vertical perspective, we can tip it back, we can tip it forward, okay? But what we're wanting to do is just nudge it the tiniest little bit. So I do something like about 3 there, hit enter or OK. And what we can see here now is that this has straightened it up. So you can't see the image. My apologies. Yes. Well, let's do that. Let's all do that all again. Right. Okay. So. Thank you. Right. Okay. Let's start again. So here we have our Tesco thing. And what we can see is there's a little bit of gap at the top. So duplicate that layer. Go to filter, lens correction. And yes, what I was talking about here is if we go to custom and your horizontal perspective, shifts it left, shifts it right. Your vertical perspective shifts it down, shifts it up. So if we take this and we just nudge it a little bit, something like that, then when we come back to, click OK here, when we come back to our vertical lines here, we now find that at the top here, it's not really, there's much less of a gap than there was. So we can do it subtly, okay? If we come to something like this, we would obviously have to do it much more. The problem is the more we do it, the more it's going to start looking slightly false. So again, I go to filter, lens correction, custom, vertical perspective, nudge it to the left, and we can see it's tilting it up and tilting it up to the point whereby we've actually lost the top of the picture. So if we want to have a little bit more manual control over this, what I could do instead is, if I in Photoshop press Ctrl and T, it allows me to transform, and I can free transform. And if I hold down my Control or Command, if you're on an Apple, I can grab this corner and drag it over like this. And then I can grab this corner and I can drag it over like this. And what I'm trying to do now, the problem is as I drag one way, I drag the whole thing the other. So I'm going to have to kind of keep pulling it backwards and forwards a little bit until I get this top bit lined up with the bottom. And what I might need to do is actually just take it up a little touch as well, something like that. And now I have a more vertical Tesco. Okay. However, it's also squashed it somewhat. And the more we do this, the more it distorts it. So let me give you another example then. Let's say we take this picture of a postbox. Now, if taking a photo of it from above, we get this converging verticals down towards the bottom. Taken from below, we get the converging verticals towards the top. Can we correct this so it looks like we've taken this from straight on? Okay, so I could open this with Photoshop. I could take this image, I could duplicate that layer, I could take the transform, and I could grab this, drag it out that way, grab this, drag it out that way. And what I might want to do is even have a couple of guidelines at the bottom here so I know where I'm trying to drag the top to level it up with. And as we can see, we've got to kind of really drag it way out in order to get it to line up with the bottom. We've done that now, but of course, obviously, it's looking rather squashed and flat. So what I might do is put it on another layer, do another Control T. Now I'll hold down the out, or no, not that, no, not that one. Sorry, which button? Shift button? Yes, Shift button allows me to then stretch this up so I can then kind of make it slightly longer, slightly more in proportion to the rest of the picture. But it's still not giving us exactly the same as our original here, which is thinner to begin with. But also the other thing about this one is we can see the top, which we can't. So with this, we have shot it from underneath. It just wouldn't look like this. So the point is we can use it for a certain amount, that if you've only got a little bit of tilt, you can make that adjustment fairly easily. If you've got a lot of tilt, then the more adjustments you may have to make, the more false it's going to seem. Okay, with all these things, generally speaking, subtle is better if you want to be able to get away with it without everybody looking at it going, oh look, they've completely edited or made a terrible version of the edit. So where does this leave us all with Marilyn's picture? So let's open Marilyn's picture back here. So what I can do is, if I duplicate the layer, Control T, hold or Command, hold my finger down on them. So what we've got here, these are tilted. We will take a guideline here to stick for the edge of the building, somewhere around here. We don't have to get it exact. We're going to stick another one over here somewhere so that we know we're wanting to get parallel with that. We'll shove one in the middle somewhere just so it doesn't get too lost. Yeah, sort of somewhere around there. What I would also say is we want to be kind of slightly careful of the horizontals as well. So we'll just sort of grab something around there just to kind of give us a guideline. Now I come back to here and I can drag this out this way, and I can drag this out this way. And now it's starting to look slightly more. So as long as this line here, yep, we've got a parallel to the corner. This one here, I think the building itself might be tilted, but we've got a parallel to that drain pipe. Maybe you can come back just a fraction there, something like that. Then, and I'll clear those guides. Then what we can see is, Now, what it's also done, like what happened with other things, is it's flattened it slightly. So what we might want to do is just stretch it up a bit. So again, if I do a Command T and then hold down the Shift key, then I can just stretch it up a little bit just to make it kind of feel slightly more in proportion. Okay, so overall we've gone from that to that. And I think anybody looking at this picture now wouldn't think for a moment that you'd edited it. Okay, it does feel like this is kind of what you see. So the only real way then, to come back to this, Marilyn, the only real way to avoid getting that convergence, well, different ways of, well, ultimately, first of all, you don't use a wide angle lens, but of course you're trying to fit in as much as you can. To minimize the problem of convergent lines, you need to be as straight on to the image, you need to be further back and zooming in. Because further back and zooming in means that there's less angle between you and the top or the bottom or the sides of the image that you're photographing. Okay, the closer you come into it, the more those angles are just there from our natural perspective. So further back and zoomed in creates less distortion. Then there's another thing, which is, generally speaking, your relative position as well to it, that if you are above an item of subject, it will converge downwards. If you're below a subject, it will converge upwards. So you're trying to get, if you're kind of around the middle. It's an interesting thing when you're doing full-length portraits. When you're doing a full-length portrait, you don't shoot from eye level. What you really do is you tend to shoot from about chest level. Okay? Because if you shoot from eye level, then the feet end up getting narrower as you go down. So generally speaking, if you shoot from about chest level, you tend to get a slightly better proportioned sense of who it is you're looking at. Then if their head is starting to look a little bit far out, you ask them to just tilt forward slightly so that you're counteracting any problems of the head looking slightly smaller in proportion to the body. So you're looking to minimize that distance between the top and the bottom and the angle between the top and the bottom from the viewpoint of the camera. So I hope that's all making sense to you, Marilyn. So ultimately, that's what you're trying to do when you take the photo. And then when you come to editing, you have the option to use your transform to stretch out the top, anchor the bottom bits, stretch out the top bits, and that until they become kind of much more parallel. And then if necessary, because it will squash it a bit, stretch it up a little bit as well. There's a certain amount of just judging it by eye until it kind of looks, feels right, and experience will teach you so. So I hope that all makes sense. A couple more comments. April says, welcome to Prasad. VG says, pleasure to assist. Understanding Photography by Kim Ayres is the name of the group. Kim is also the group's name. Okay, so VG's giving Prasad a little bit more information. Susan was saying couldn't see the image. VG saying this straightening is good, always struggled. Thanks, Kim. Marilyn says this is great. Thanks. Okay, excellent. Right, well, thank you very much to Marilyn, John and Eamonn for sending in images, and I hope you've all found that to be rather useful. So I think that pretty much brings us to the conclusion. A kind of quick reminder, no, not that one. Quick reminder that if you're finding these podcasts useful, interesting, entertaining, would like to support them, then buymeacoffee.com/Kim Ayres, one of the ways you can do it. And Prasad or anybody else who happens to be watching, if you would like to kind of carry on with this, then make sure you subscribe, click the notification bell so you know when new ones are coming along. But if you're on Facebook, join us on the Facebook group. If you're not on Facebook but you are on Flickr or you would like to start a Flickr group, there you can join us there. I tend to put all the information. These are places where you can submit images, or you can even email me, kim@kimayres.co.uk. And so next week we have the challenge. So last week we were talking about the power of two, and if anybody has missed that bit, just go back to the channel here and find episode 249, where I talk in length about that notion of the power of two subjects in a picture and how it's different from one, but it's also different from three, that it has its own unique aspects to it. everything I talked about there, I'm hoping that you will have all taken on board, with the idea that next week you're going to stick in, we've got the challenge. So what I need you to do is send me in your photos. Again, put them in the Facebook group, put them in the Flickr group, email them to me. Tell me a little bit about your photo as well, because I think the stories behind the photos are always a bit more interesting. Why you've decided to choose that one, any interesting little anecdotes about the notion of the two subjects that you have in them. So think about the two subjects. What's the relationship between the two? What's the story between the two subjects? How is that? Are these two very similar images, two similar subjects? Are they quite different subjects? What creates the relationship between them? How are you positioning them within the photo? How is your eye being drawn from one to the other? Okay, what stories are we starting to think of when we look at them? All these kind of ideas. And I really look forward to seeing what you're going to send in. Make sure you get them to me by Friday. So what's the 27th next week? So Friday the 25th is ideal, because it gives me, I still have to have time to organise these podcasts along with everything else I do in my life. So the earlier I get the images, the easier it is for me to sort out the podcast. Saturday morning the 26th at the absolute latest. Right. VG said she missed. She missed that one, so she will watch it tonight. Yeah, absolutely. Lots of information. I think you'll really enjoy it, VG. Right. Okay, and that's everybody running away. So, like I say, once again, thank you very much to everyone for sending in the images. So, John, Eamonn, and Marilyn, and I hope you've all found that interesting. And I look forward to seeing what you send in for the Power of Two challenge next week. Take care. Bye bye.